Just a little bit different tonight. Not really, though. I mean, we're in a subject called faith, which we know really well, and we're in probably the most familiar possible territory in Hebrews chapter 11. It's just I've never preached this lesson before. I've got some notes here, and here we go. And so you're going to be the home crowd, so if you hear some things you think work, let me know. And if you hear some things that need some work, keep it short, but let me know. It just felt right, though. It's Thursday morning, just doing some Bible read Thursday morning, and the Bible read happened to be in Hebrews chapter 11, and I know most of the people here have read Hebrews chapter 11 multiple times. I'm trying something a little bit different this time through, and I'm reading from a more kind of modern version of the Bible, the New Living Translation, which isn't particularly great for Bible study and textual analysis, but it reads really fluently and kind of beautifully. And there was just some terminology that came jumping off the page when I was reading it recently. I'll mention that to you as we go along. And I thought if we're going to go from grace to faith to life, we need to get to Hebrews 11 and make sure that we're approaching this faith business in a way that's consistent with the examples that we've been given. So that's where we'll be. If the good Lord wills, tomorrow night we'll still be working on the internals, but it will be more about how the attitude inside of you starts to shape the world around you. So we're moving from internal faith to actual external experience. Tuesday night we'll talk about relationships. Wednesday night I'm still kind of working on it. We'll see where it goes, but it'll be about maybe some things we can do to get this really working for us in the way that we trust God. Hebrews 11 is where you need to be to get started, and I want to start with some super duper simple things. We're talking about grace to faith to life, and in particular, it's not about faith being the triangle thing that balances the rest. Faith is more the bridge that gets you from all that God is doing for you to the things that you are doing for God. It's that method by which you take in His glory and you produce a holy life. You take in His power does something to you, and as a result of what it does to you, you start to talk differently and live differently. So the question we'll address early on tonight is, how does faith bridge that gap between God's work upon you and the life that you're living? Now, simple stuff. The things in the white box, you could have brought anybody in from anywhere to talk about because we've said it in every lesson ever on faith, but it seems like the right place to start. If you want to talk about how faith works, it is founded on your belief in two things. Your belief in God's power, His ability to accomplish things you can't accomplish, and faith is based upon the promises that God made, which beautiful song, Oceans. I almost didn't even preach. Just sing it again and let's go home. Did you hear the singing of that song? Like, you've never failed. You won't stop now. So he says, give us trust without borders. And I want you to see that it's about your belief in that which God can do and has promised. And we saw this already in verse 1, this assurance of things that you believe are true because God has said they're true. You haven't seen them or experienced many of them, and you don't need to in order to believe it. There's a reason why you believe that, verse 3, because you understand something. You understand that this entire universe was designed in a moment by the power of the great God of heaven, and that He has created all things and He has prepared all things by His word. Verse 6, you also understand that without faith it's impossible to please Him. For if I'm going to come to God, I have to believe that He exists, power, and believe that He rewards those who seek Him, promises. Verse 13 says this. He's given some examples which I will be showing you tonight. He said, all these people I just talked to you about, they died in faith. They left this earth in faith without receiving the promises. But having seen those promises and having welcomed them from a distance and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth, they died with a great sense of hope and they received the promise. And that's what faith is. Faith is you live your best, you trust Him in all that you can because He has made some promises that you believe, and He has proven that He has the ability to do it. Now, as the outcome of that, our faith will begin to be active. And that's what really the large part of Hebrews 11 is about. I don't know if you've ever done this marking before. If you're okay with a little bit of Bible marking, I would highly suggest in Hebrews 11 that you somehow note the word faith, which is really easy. You have faith in verse 1 and 3 and 4 and 5, all the way through. But in most of those cases, it follows faith with a verb. Have you ever noticed that? Has anybody ever noticed how all the way through Hebrews 11, you've got by faith, that is by the fact that I believe in who He is and what He can do, and then you get a verb. I'll give you a few of these. By faith, Abel offered. By faith, verse 7, Noah prepared. By faith, verse 8, Abraham obeyed. Verse 9, he lived. You can go down to verse 22 and following about how he made mention, Joseph did, verse 22, and all the way through. Verse 27, by faith he left. Verse 28, by faith Moses kept, and all the way through. This section is getting you to see the entire unit of what we're here to talk about. That if you truly believe in what God can do and has promised, verbs will be natural. We've got to get away from this idea of forced obedience, of fear-based obedience. You need to do what's right or else. You need to do what's right because it's right. Yeah, that's true. But more naturally, it's like the sun and the moon. Do you know why the moon glows at night? It naturally glows at night because of all of the light it draws from the sun, and it does what it's supposed to do as an automatic reaction. And that's the way obedience should be for us. So steeped in faith that we do that which is right. Now, here's what I want to show you that may be a little bit different tonight. We already read Hebrews 11, verses 1 through 6. And there are two examples given there. Are you familiar with these two examples? He says, let me get you acclimated to faith, and the best way that I choose to do that is to talk to you about Abel and Enoch. I practiced this yesterday, and I think I said eunuch about 10 times, so expect at least one of those. But he said, I'm going to give you two examples that will get you moving in the right direction. And so I was reading this the other day, and I had just a simple question. Of all of the examples that God could have chosen to set up the great hall of faith that we'll preach from forever, why do you think he paired together Abel and Enoch? Seems like an odd pair. I mean, they're both from way early on in Genesis. I get that. But you notice that God puts people together on purpose. It's kind of like James 2 this morning. Abraham and Rahab, that's on purpose. That's to get you to see all kinds of angles about the different places that faith is found. So let me give you a couple of ideas on why Abel and Enoch were chosen. First of all, Abel, in contrast to his brother, offered sacrifices, and this came from that New Living Translation. He gave witness to his righteousness by the offering of sacrifices. And that really kind of hit home with me. He said, I will show my relationship with God by offering to God that which pleases God. And because Abel made that offering, that sacrifice to the Lord blessed him. And it's a pretty simple story. But the thing is, you know from the New Testament that that's the way you're supposed to be thinking about your life. We won't read this passage, but you know what Romans 12:1 says. What does Romans 12 say? That you are a living sacrifice. That every day when you get out of bed, you're supposed to be Abel. You're supposed to be the person who goes, today I will make an offering to you to provide for you. Turn forward just a little bit to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28. This also mentions sacrifices, but the New American Standard says gratitude, which I think is a great add. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28. Therefore, since we've received a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. We make offerings to God. That's what happens. Now, here's what's interesting going back to our text. In the one case, he said, Abel is a guy I want you to focus on because he made sacrifices that pleased God. And I also want you to focus on Enoch for a totally different reason. In fact, it doesn't really say much about what Enoch did. It does say in verse 5 that he was pleasing to God and God was happy with that. But the main point of bringing up Enoch is not the giving of the witness of the sacrifices. It's the fact that God took him up into a life beyond this life. Now, here's what I want you to see. Look at those two things. This is it. This is the foundation of the way faith has always worked. It is like taking two simple examples and saying this is almost everything you need to know about faith. Number one, God has this power to take you beyond this life. There are limitations to this life, and you know that there are. There are troubles in this life, and you know that there are. There are hard things you have to face. God is going to take you beyond this life, and in the meantime, because you believe that you're leaving this place, Because you're a stranger and alien trying to simply navigate it, every day you get up and you make offerings to God in gratitude for what He has promised. This is probably the simplest way to describe how faith works possible. But there are two questions that I have for myself and I want to present to you. Let me just present it to you. Is that how you would describe your daily life? How many mornings do you get up and say, all right, here's what I know. I know I'm not going to be here very long, and that God is going to take me from this place, and He is going to send me to the riches of heaven, so I'm going to use opportunities I get everywhere that I go to make sacrifices in His honor. I've got to be honest with you. I spent a lot of years not thinking that way. We've got a lot of places to go. We've got a lot of things to do. Number one, I'm probably not going to heaven today. I mean, you know what I mean. I mean, maybe, but probably not. And there's so much going on today that I don't know if I can think in terms of like sacrifices and offerings and gratitude. I'm just going to try to get to work in back. You should see the people I work with. Sorry. People you work with. I work with great people. But what if this is the way you thought about a living faith every morning? You thought, God is taking me home. God is taking me home, and so in the meantime, every sacrifice I can make, every opportunity I can offer, everything that I can do, I want to do it. And I've got a second question. What would this look like if you were all in? You guys know what all in is like? Because I don't. I don't know what all in would look like. What would all in look like? I mean, you still have to go to work tomorrow, and you still have to go to school, and you still have a few things that you need to do. But what if your life was completely captivated by the idea that I offer praise and sacrifice to my God, and one day when He's ready, He takes me home? And it affected every relationship that you had, every conversation that you had, what you did with your money, what you did with your time, what you did with the smile, these little muscles on your face that go this way, like what you did with everything about you became about this thing. What I'm convinced of here and I've never noticed before is these two guys are pretty much painting the full scope of the picture. We've just got to get out there and live the scope of that picture. Now, we can talk in broad terms, but ultimately it just kind of comes down to choices. If you believe that what God will do for you is like what God did for Enoch, at the point of death or at the point of Christ's return, then when choices get difficult and sacrifices have to be made, you will make them. Can I show you an example of that? Go with me to Hebrews 11, verses 17, 18, and 19. I want to present a thought to you that links this together. Verse 17, we're going to look at Noah, Sarah, and Abraham in the middle section in a moment, but I'm skipping to the end of what we'll be covering tonight. Because what I want you to see is Abraham is Abel and Enoch in one event. Verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. How could he do something like that? You know, we can talk about sacrifices if you want. I mean, you know, God calls for you to sacrifice a little time in the morning, you know, and sacrifice a few relationships and sacrifice a little bit of comfort. But I don't know that many of us have been asked to sacrifice our son that God told us would change the whole world. God did that too, by the way. But what he finds is he was able to do so because of an Enoch-like understanding. Verse 19, he considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. Now, it's not the same thing as Enoch being called up, but it is the same thing as saying that this life is not all there is. That after this life, there's still life. And God can call me into the glories of heaven, or Jesus can call the girl's spirit back into her body. Abraham is both Abel and Enoch in a moment, in a very challenging moment. So I started wondering, what are the limits of what I believe? What moments would serve as the barrier for how far I could go? Look, I believe I need to be like Abel. I need to make sacrifices to God, and I really need to think of my life more like that, personally. And I believe God can call life to wherever he wants. But what are my limits? Abraham had no limits. And that's the faith that I'm interested in. I'm interested in developing a faith that takes the limits off of the offerings, because we believe that we serve a limitless God. It would be interesting in a Bible class to just talk about what your limits are. How much can you give and then you can't give anymore? How much can you do for God and then you just can't keep doing for God? I need you to understand that that's not a limitation on your abilities, that's a limitation on your belief. If God is limitless in power, if he is limitless in time and space, then why are there limits on your faith and how much you will give and how much you will do? I'm interested in developing a faith that has no limits. So let's see if we can work on that. I want you to stay here in the text, and I'm going to back up and read verses 6 and following. There are 3 examples, and I think they're going to benefit us. You get a little bit of Noah, and a little bit of Abraham, and a little bit of Sarah. And so I want to look at these with you for a moment. Back up to verse 6, Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And now we get into Noah a little bit. By faith, Noah, and every preacher's got their Noah sermon base right here. We read the verse, we go to Genesis, really great sermon. But I'm a little bit more interested this time in why he's tucked Noah into this opening narrative. Like, what is Noah's contribution to the point that the Hebrew writer is making? So let's read it. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Now here's what really jumped out at me. In fact, this entire sermon exists because I was reading Hebrews 11:7 in the NLT version. And in verse 7, it said, by faith Noah, being warned by God, believed in things that had never happened before. And I thought, that's where I'm going to start. Where I'm going to start developing deeper faith is I'm going to go to Scripture and learn to lean into God in the way that I can believe in things that have never happened before with the assurance of their coming. I mean, had anybody ever built an ark? I don't think so. Had the world ever been flooded? It sounds like it had never been flooded before. He believed in something, think about it, that had never happened before, that nobody thought was possible. Everybody thought he was crazy, but he only put a couple of months into building the thing, so it's not like it cost him that much. It took like 100 years. How many daily what's 100 times 365? How many daily offerings of the calluses on his hands, the pain in his back, the ridicule from the world? Like, this guy offered service to God for 100 years because when God said something's going to happen, I will live every day knowing that it's going to happen. And that was his faith. Faith is going to ask you to do some crazy things. And one of them is it's going to ask you to believe in things that have never happened before, particularly when God makes a promise. God has never failed in a single promise that he has ever made to anyone by faith. Go to 2 Peter chapter 3. We'll come back. I was thinking about what would connect to that in your future and mine, and it seems very obvious that it has to be this. God promised Noah that a judgment was coming. He promised him that he was going to send destruction upon the earth and that all who are selfish and wicked would be destroyed, and only those who made these offerings, building the ark, would be saved. How do you connect that with today? Only one thing. God has promised that a judgment day is coming. I know there's a lot of kind of modern preaching on that. I say I don't mean it like totally negatively, but there's a lot of, maybe there's no judgment day and maybe Jesus isn't really, I don't buy any of that. The Bible promises that Jesus is coming to judge the world. When you're getting up every day deciding to be righteous or wicked, God is coming to judge the wicked. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, do not let this one fact escape your notice. You're looking at time and wondering where God is. With God, a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. God is not slow about his promise. God never fails on a promise. He's just patient. He's patient towards you. He doesn't want anybody to be lost. He wants everyone to repent. I've said this a couple of times before, but everybody wants to know when the promise is coming, which again kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. Because the point is, I've never, ever seen it before. It's never happened before, but it is always imminent because God promised it. But if you'd really like to know the exact date Jesus is coming back, it is January. I have no idea. But I would argue this, verse 10 and 9. When no more souls on this earth will turn to God, Jesus will return. Because the purpose for waiting is so that some soul might find faith, so that some soul might believe in a God greater than himself and begin to make sacrifices of himself. Well, at the day of the Lord, verse 10, it'll come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness? You know what I would say? You need to be like Abel. You need to get up every day and go, this may be the day. It doesn't have to be the day. My faith isn't dependent upon it being the day. I've never seen it before. Half the world rejects that it even exists. But I believe it so much that today, God, I will make my offerings to you. Don't get up another day of your life without making intentional offerings to the glory of God because you believe in this. We believe in his promises, and that's important. But I want to add just a little side note to this, then we'll go to the second one. I can't answer this for you, but I was looking at some of the examples throughout Hebrews chapter 12. It wasn't all about the judgment or death and decay, and so I just kind of wondered, what things in your life that have never happened before are possible with the power of God? Anything? Things that you never thought were going to happen, that you didn't think were possible, because of your own limitations, because you don't know how to get it done, because you don't know how you would handle it, because you and your power. But what are some things that have never, ever happened, but with God they become possible? We start to learn that life has a lot more opportunity to it when we have the kind of faith that believes in what God can do. With God, it is possible. Now, let me show you a second example in Hebrews chapter 11. He goes straight from Noah, who believed in something that had never happened before, to Abraham, who believed in an inheritance that he had never seen before. How could he see it? He didn't even know where he was going. He just took off. God said go, and he took off. In verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out. He didn't even know where he was going. By faith, he lived as an alien in a land of promise. God had promised it. As in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise, for he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Faith is Abraham, believing that because God said there is a place prepared, there is a place prepared. Because God said that this is a place you've never seen before, but I have prepared for you, he went. And so it ought to be for us. What can you compare that to? Only one thing, only heaven. God has promised us that Jesus is coming back. It is absolute, and it ought to dictate every day's worth of offerings. But he has also promised a place called heaven. He has promised an eternal rest and abode, and the Hebrew writer talks about it. Go back to Hebrews chapter 4, please. Hebrews chapter 4. We could look at a lot of passages about heaven. Heaven's a really interesting place. A lot of people think they know what it's going to be like. Most people don't have any idea, maybe no one, exactly what it's going to be like. I don't need to know what it's going to be like. There's a lot of popular teaching today about how it's going to be a restored earth or heaven on earth or earth and heaven or angels or no, I don't know. Look, there'll be angels. That's all I know. Other than that, I know this. God promised me that it exists, and while I've never seen it before, I believe in the one who has told me so. In Hebrews chapter 4, in verse 9, he says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested, Hebrews 4:10, from his works, as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. One of the things that are required here, there really can't be a day of your life when you don't think about where God wants to take you. And the place that Jesus said he has prepared for you, and the rest that will be available there. Like Enoch was taken, I will be taken to a place that Jesus has prepared. And as a result of that, I've got to live like I know it. I'm living for heaven. Preachers of old used to say, if you miss heaven, you missed everything, and they're right, because God promised it. I will say this, when our faith in God's promises begins to waver, don't be surprised if your life has trouble holding together. You're not going to be able to do right if you don't believe entirely, because it's not about you and how strong you are even in the face of your doubts. It's about God and how strong He is and how much I believe in Him. Like, that's how it works. Made me think of a second question, though, I wanted to run by you. Heaven is the main point because God always fulfills His promises. Abraham went to a land they'd never seen before, and God took him to the ultimate land. But I wonder this, what things in your life that you've not yet explored are doors that God will open for you? You can make this list. Here are things that I've never been able to go and do. Here's mission work I've never been able to go and do. Here are relationships I've never been able to go and mend. Here are opportunities that are never going to happen for me. And if I ask you why, you give me this long laundry list of things that God can overpower with a blink. One of the questions that we have to have is this: do I believe enough in God laying out pathways that I believe that God can bless things and make them possible by His power, not my own? Let's go to Sarah. In Hebrews chapter 11, we get 3 examples. By faith, Noah believed in something that had never happened. Abraham, something he'd never seen. And Sarah's an interesting one because it was something she was going to do. In verse 11, by faith, even Sarah, and maybe he says even Sarah because we know that she had a little moment there where she wavered and kind of laughed about it. She was processing it. But by faith, even Sarah herself received ability, New American Standard, ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Now, please don't miss this. She's able to do a thing she could not do because she believed that he promised it was possible. If I could put one thing in your head and just put a little bow on it and keep it there, it would be that. There are plenty of things you do not believe you can do. Is that correct? There are plenty of things you have tried to do and failed to do. That would also be correct. She believed that God could empower her to do a thing she'd never been able to do before. Folks, we got to take the limits off of our faith, the limits that we've been implemented upon ourselves for what we cannot do, because she believed she could do a thing she had never done before. Now, here's what I might ask in a class scenario, but the first one's pretty easy. If I said, okay, so Noah believed in the flood, and likewise, I should believe in what promise? I think everybody in the room would go, the judgment day. Abraham believed in an inheritance he'd never seen, and you should believe in an inheritance you've never seen, which is, and everybody would say, heaven. What about this one? Sarah believed she could do a thing that she'd never done before, that God straight up promised her she could do, and he was just waiting for her to believe it. What's the like figure for that, for you and me? Gentlemen, it is not conceiving children. Birthing them, anyway. I think it's this. Go to John 15. It's a little more short term. It's by short term, I mean it's in our immediate future. John chapter 15, I want you to think about this. You know one thing Jesus promised if you have a relationship with him? I don't mean he suggested it. I don't mean he said, this may work out if you really give this a go. I mean, at least half the people will do pretty good. It's not what he said. Jesus said as a promise, as an absolute, unequivocal assurance, that if you believe that you can bear fruit in me, you will bear fruit. You will produce, not children maybe, but fruit and works and good things. In John chapter 15 and verse 5, I am the vine and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. It's not a maybe. He definitely, absolutely changes the world by the fruit that he or she bears. You go, not me. I tried that. I tried to make a difference. I tried to be a light. I tried to do what was right. I just don't think that I have the ability to bear fruit. Well, you're kind of right about that. But I'm not asking you about your ability to bear fruit. I'm asking you about your faith in God's ability to bear fruit through you. It's different, isn't it? I'm not asking you what you can do. I'm asking you what God promised that he will do. We've been studying back home quite a bit, Matthew 13 for a moment. We've been studying quite a bit, week after week, the parable of the soil and the seed and so forth. And so I just want to look at verse 23. He said in Matthew 13 and verse 23, and the one on whom seed was sown on the good soil, this is the man who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and brings forth some 100, some 60, some 30, but everyone to some great multiple. Hears the gospel and understands what? You ever thought about that in this scenario, in this story? If you hear it and you understand it, you will definitely bear fruit and no one will be... Hear what? It is the gospel of the grace and the power of your Lord Jesus Christ. It is his power. It is his ability. And it is his work. And so the promise is, produce is promised even if it's not yet happened. And for many of us, it has not yet happened. It reminds me of the story of Caleb. You know, Caleb tried to lead everybody into the land. Nobody go with him, except Joshua. But I don't know. He wasn't a good war partner. They weren't going to do it without the rest of them. And 40 years later, he's like 85 years old. And they go, hey, now God blesses you. And what did Caleb say? Let's go. If God has blessed me to do it, it will happen. What things in your life were you unable to do? You failed before, didn't work, but God has prepared for you to do now. You know what the answer to that really is? I don't know. I mean, isn't that really the answer to the second question in all three cases? What are things in your life that have not yet happened that God, I don't know. What are things that you've not yet explored that are, I don't know. I probably could think about it. What are things in your life you were unable to do? I don't know, but can I tell you who knows? God knows. And I think it's time to take the limits off of what I think I know. Do you do that too? I think I know what I can do and can't do. I'm pretty sure I know my limitations. I'm not interested in your limitations. I'm asking you about God's limitations. Well, God has no limitations. Now you're on the right track. If God has no limitations and he blesses your life for favor and work, neither do you. That's the concept that we're seeing in this story. So let me tie this together with a couple of thoughts. Simple idea that we set up. We've heard it all before. Abel made offerings by faith, and that's the way you need to think about your life. Because of who God is, I want to make offerings. Enoch was taken by God for his faith, and that's the ultimate goal for all of this, and the greatest promise God made in the judgment. And Abraham took these truths, and he just removed all limitations. He decided he could do what the world would have considered impossible. In fact, many people in the room probably consider offering your own child to be impossible. But if your belief in God has no limits, then your ability to obey him has no limits either. We looked at these three examples: Noah, Abraham, Sarah. New experiences, promised experiences. New destinations, promised ones. New achievements, limitless faith in God's promises and power. I'm just excited. I don't know. Maybe this sermon's terrible. It's never happened before. This is the first time. Grade it. I don't care. It's over. But I'll tell you this. I've really been doing a lot of self-evaluation on how much I've been limiting what is possible by the grace and the power of the Lord. And I want to try to live a life this year that stops doing that and starts to see what's possible. With God, all things are possible. Every promise for sure, go to Ephesians 6 so we can finish. Every promise for sure is fully assured. So what, as we end this thing, what is holding you back? You say, how much time you got, Kris? Let's go have some coffee. Let me tell you all the things that are holding me back. If you had to make a list of 10 things that are holding you back from the new experiences, from stepping out in faith, from making a big decision, from missionary work, from adoption, from just saying you're sorry to somebody, and you had to list all the reasons why you just can't do that thing, they would all include limitations you perceive in yourself or limitations you perceive in others, or maybe just this crazy world we live in. I loved it today. I found out is it verse of the month? Is it all month? How awesome is this verse? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. I'm not interested in your might. If it's anything like mine, it's not worth talking about. I'm not interested in your ability. I'm interested, Ephesians 6 and 10, I'm interested in the strength that comes in connection with the Lord and his might. And all of a sudden, what seemed impossible is as good as done. when it's God's strength and not your own. Folks, that's what it means to receive the grace of God, access to His strength and belief in the gravity of it, changing your heart to believe the unbelievable. Because let me tell you, whatever you think about tonight's lesson, there are 3 things that are sure. The Lord is coming back to look for faith. The Lord will take those who please Him to heaven. And it will be those who are bearing fruit in the name of Jesus Christ. Make that you, but make it you by what He can do, not yourself. Limitless in Christ. If we can help you become a Christian, it's hard to imagine what life is like to go out there and try to do better and be stronger without enjoying the grace of God to fuel it. If you're not a child of God, you haven't been united with Christ, where are you drawing your power from? I was talking earlier today about the American culture. You know, you go out and you do it yourself. Everybody's got to figure it out. Get what you deserve. I hope I don't with God. I hope I don't get what I deserve. And I hope He's not waiting on me to figure it out. But maybe He is. He's waiting on me to realize that He's already got it figured out. And He can give me everything I need. If that's what you need, if you need God, come to Him as together we stand and sing.